All right, today we are jumping into a big one, Marxism. But listen, we're not going to treat it like some dusty old theory that's just locked away in a library. Nope. We're going to follow it as a living, breathing idea, one that has totally changed how we think about power, about culture, and, even about reality itself. Okay, let's get into it.
So, this is really the big question we're going to be digging into. Is it some kind of master key for unlocking how society works? Or is it just an old idea that doesn't really apply anymore? For more than 100 years, thinkers have been wrestling with Marx's ideas, twisting them, updating them, and radicalizing them to try and explain a world he never could have seen coming. So, let's start where it all began.
And our journey, of course, has to start with Karl Marx himself. His big, fundamental move was to look at the world that was taking shape all around him and basically say, hold on a second, this isn't what you guys think it is.
See, Marx's real genius was tearing down the popular story of his time, this idea of a fair, neutral, free market, and exposing it as, a myth. He argued that capitalism wasn't some level playing field. No, it was, first and foremost, a power structure, and it was built on a deep, fundamental conflict.
And here's how that power structure actually works. On one side, you've got the bourgeoisie. They're the ones who own all the stuff you need to make things, right? The factories, the land, the tech. And on the other side, you have the proletariat, the workers. And they have nothing to sell except for their ability to work. Now, the really crucial part here is this idea of surplus value. Think about it. A worker might create, say, $10 of value in an hour, but they only get paid $5. So where's that extra $5 go? That's the surplus, the profit. And for Marx, that wasn't just business, it was a kind of systematic theft that was the hidden engine of the whole system.
And this leads to one of his most radical ideas of all. Liberal thought, at the time, often just assumed there was this fixed human nature. That we're all just naturally greedy or competitive, which makes capitalism seem like the only system that could ever work. Well, Marx just flips that completely on its head. He argues that our identity, our human essence, is really just the total sum of our social relationships. We aren't born to be capitalists. We are shaped piece by piece by the economic system we live in.
Okay, so now let's jump forward into the 20th century. Marx had predicted that eventually the workers of the world would rise up and overthrow this whole exploitative system. But in the big industrialized countries in the West, that just didn't happen. And this led a group of thinkers, who we now call the Frankfurt School, to ask a really important question.
Yeah, what went wrong? Why, when the exploitation was so obvious, did the masses just seem to go along with it all? Was Marx just totally wrong? Or had the system developed some new, sneakier way to defend itself?
Their answer was something they called the culture industry. They argued that all this mass-produced culture, movies, radio, pop music, it had basically become the new opium of the masses. It wasn't just harmless fun. Oh no. It was an ideological machine, constantly telling us that the way things are is the only way they can be. It made capitalism feel normal, natural, and even fun, which basically just sucked all the revolutionary energy right out of the room.
And they had this brilliant analogy using jazz music. When you listen to a jazz solo, it sounds like pure freedom, right? Totally spontaneous. But it's actually all built on a very rigid underlying structure of chords and repeating themes. Well, they said modern capitalism works the exact same way. We think we're expressing our unique personalities with our clothes or our ringtones, but really we're just improvising inside a system that profits from what they called our freedom to be the same. And this really gets at the deep pessimism of the Frankfurt School. They saw people becoming what one of them, Herbert Marcuse, called one-dimensional men, where all our desires and even our criticisms just get absorbed and sold back to us by the system. It's a really bleak picture, and it's captured perfectly by that image of zombies, just mindlessly wandering through a shopping mall, a grim little parody of the modern consumer.
So the Frankfurt School showed how culture could keep people in line. But what if the control went even deeper than that? What if it was built into the very language we use to think? This is the huge, radical step that the next evolution takes, which we often call post-Marxism. Thinkers like Antonio Gramsci started to argue that the real fight wasn't just in the factory or on the TV screen, it was in language itself.
Now to get this, let's just do a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine a simple wooden object. The question seems easy, right? What is it? But is it really that simple? Its identity isn't just in the wood and the nails. I mean, if you put dinner on it in your kitchen, it's a table. If you put a sacred text on it in a church, it becomes an altar. If you stand on it to give a speech in the town square, now it's a platform. The physical thing didn't change at all, but its meaning,
Its reality changed completely based on the context. And that, right there, is the core of what's called discourse theory. The idea is that there is no final, objective truth outside of the way we talk about things. We can't just get to the world as it really is. We can only ever understand it through these frameworks of meaning that are themselves human inventions. Gramsci just nails it here. What we call objective reality is really just a subjective agreement that's become so common, so widespread, that we just accept it as being universal truth. And if that's true, it means that reality itself is a political battlefield where different groups are constantly fighting to make their version of the story the dominant common sense.
So this brings us right up to one of the most famous and maybe provocative thinkers in this whole tradition today, Slavoj Žižek. He takes all these ideas about power, culture, language, and he uses them to go back and look at one of Marx's biggest concerns, ideology. He asks this really crucial question. In a world that loves to say it's post-ideological, how does ideology actually work now? For Žižek, ideology works by taking a problem that's actually internal to the system, a deep flaw, a contradiction it can't solve, and it projects that problem outward, onto an enemy. The classic and most horrifying example is Nazi Germany. Instead of dealing with the real economic chaos crippling the country, the Nazis invented a fantasy where everything was the fault of a single group, the Jew. By turning an internal failure into an external enemy, the system gives you a simple, violent solution. If we just get rid of this other, all our problems will magically disappear.
And this way of thinking helps Žižek totally rethink the idea of class. He says it's not just about factory workers anymore. The new class is the position of anyone who is totally left out of the global system. We're talking about refugees, slum dwellers, the undocumented. They aren't a group with a shared, positive identity. They are the living, breathing symptom that reveals the failures of the entire system. They become the other that we project all our fears about globalization onto, the living proof that the system is not working for everybody. So, wow, after this long and winding road, where does all of this leave us? Well, it shows that Marxism isn't just one single unchanging belief system. It's a critical tradition, a way of thinking that has constantly had to change its tools to analyze the ever-changing face of power.
When you look at the whole arc, you can see this steady radicalization of the idea. It starts with Marx, who exposed the power hidden inside of economics. Then the Frankfurt School found that same power working through mass culture. The post-Marxist went even deeper, arguing that power literally shapes reality itself through discourse. And then finally, Žižek brings us to today, showing us how ideology works to cover up the system's own deep-seated flaws.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty challenging thought. When we talk about market reality or globalization, as if they're just these neutral, unstoppable forces of nature, like the weather, we're hiding from our own role in making and maintaining them. The real, enduring power of this entire critical tradition is its radical accusation. It reminds us that these are human systems, built by humans, and for what they do, we have no alibi.